In the previous episode, the ENEOS GT3 got 3D scanned by Illumisthetic, got a cage designed by Cage Kits, and then it was welded in by Marcus Fry. Now, we're gonna work on the drivetrain. First up is what I'm gonna call the pinion shaft, because I don't really know the exact name for it, but it's essentially the pinion gear connected to a shaft that goes through the middle of the transmission. And Subaru Gears designs one that is designed specifically for their rear-wheel drive conversion. So normally these transmissions have a center differential that transfers power to the rear wheels. Subaru Gears designed this for a two-wheel drive application so that there's a coupler that transfers the power from the gears directly to the pinion shaft. Now this is gonna be kind of a techie long video because there's so much cool stuff that goes into this transmission, but the long story short is that we're taking a transmission that sits behind an engine, right, in the front of a car and transfers power to the front wheels and the back wheels and flipping it around. So Chris from Subiworks down in Southern California has done hundreds of these transmissions. They're the wholesaler for Subaru Gears in the United States. He's got everything in his shop that he needs to just knock these things out. Even though this was his first 6-speed transmission, there was, little hiccups, but here and there, it was amazing. You can see him just paying attention to every little detail, spinning a bearing as he pushes in the new gear just to make sure that's functioning. It's really cool to see him work. So the cool thing about Chris is that he also used to work for Subaru and all the rally teams. So he has all the right tools to put everything together. This cool little socket, or big socket as you might see, that we use to pull apart the ring gear was pretty rad, and if we didn't have that, we probably would have been destroying things. So he has all the right tools, and not only the tools, but also the knowledge to put these things together. So one of the unique things about this is you can see the two bell housings next to each other here. The ring gear essentially swaps from one side of the transmission to the other in order to make it spin the other direction. The transmission is now going from behind the motor to in front of the motor, but the car still needs to move forward, obviously. Otherwise, we'd have 6 reverse gears propelling the car backwards. And for those that don't know, in a Porsche, the engine is all the way at the back of the car and the transmission sits in front of it. So here we have the 2 ring gears side by side. Here you can see the obvious difference in the cut of the gears. This is because one ring gear will go on one side of the bell housing, whereas the existing old one, the OEM piece, would go on the other side. And by putting the pinion still in the same place, the transmission spins the other direction. You can see how beefy the Subaru gears are and how they designed the teeth to be a lot stronger than the OEM one. So you can see the OEM one's much smaller. It's pretty rad how much thought and everything has gone into this. Here you can see the new ring gear being placed into the new bell housing. This utilizes the existing LSD from the STI transmission. And now it starts coming together. The piece that's called the pinion shaft is being installed, and that's essentially linking the power to all the driving gears. When Chris turns this thing around, you'll be able to see the engagement, but that piece that you see at the top of the shaft right now, that's the coupler that transfers the power to all the through gears, all the driving gears, all the shifting gears. So this part is showing the engagement between the pinion and the ring gear, and showing that even off the bat, Chris got really good engagement, and showing that the part of the pinion that's touching the ring gear is making good engagement. And the way you adjust this is by taking those 2 outside big old screws and adjusting the ring gear back and forth to engage in different parts with the ring gear. So here what we're doing is essentially taking the whole gear set and sliding it back into the transmission. Obviously it takes a little bit of ballet to get all the gears engaged right, and we found out that there's a little bit of clearancing that we need to do with the bell housing to make it all sit correctly. But in the end, it went in great, and yeah, it's incredible how many moving pieces there are. But Chris, big shout out to you for knowing what to do, and Subiworks really coming through with it. can see that coupler that transfers the power from the gears essentially to the pinion shaft. And this is the back plate that Subaru Gears makes that blocks off the rear section of the transmission, so it's only a rear, two-wheel drive transmission. So now we're putting the transmission and engine package into the car. We had to mate them together in order to be able to fit them into the chassis. And originally we thought it was going to be not that bad. Let me put it that way. Where we mocked it up and we were like, hey, this looks like it's going to fit pretty well. And then when we started getting closer to putting the axles in the correct location, we found out that there was a lot of the transmission that needed cutting. So the transmission mount wasn't too difficult. It was a pretty simple plate from another conversion that we had done that we could utilize. And then when we started getting into mounting the engine, it got really, really close to the rear subframe. And for the engine, at least for mock-up, what we did was we took the suspension cradle that holds the two rear subframes of the Porsche together and used that as an engine cradle for the EJ25. Now, this is definitely not going to be the final thing before we get on track, but at least it gets the engine into the right place. Because honestly, fitting an engine into a rear engine center transmission car is really difficult because there's no hoist or anything to mock everything up with. So what we did was we utilized this transmission crossmember, we mounted the engine in there, and then we have an aftermarket pan and everything going in just to make sure that we got all our clearance right. And then from there, what we'll do is we'll create a rear cradle that links into the OEM GT3 motor mounts. And then that way the transmission and engine are mounted as they would be in a factory Porsche. Thank you for watching the build of our ENEOS GT3. Next up, we're going to be talking about everything that went into getting it ready for unveiling at SEMA.